Welcome to One Book, One Coffee, where we delve into books that not only change minds but also change lives. Today, we're taking a journey through The Consolation of Philosophy by Boethius, and by choosing to spend your time with this book, you've set yourself apart. In a world full of endless scrolling and binge-watching, you've chosen to invest in learning and personal growth. This decision speaks volumes about your desire to seek wisdom and understanding. The Consolation of Philosophy is extraordinary in its timeless exploration of human suffering and the pursuit of true happiness. Though written in the 6th century, its insights remain profoundly relevant, offering guidance in navigating life's unpredictable nature. While I couldn't find specific endorsements from contemporary figures like Bill Gates or Tim Ferriss, this book has consistently been acknowledged by philosophers and scholars as a cornerstone of Western thought. Boethius, the author, was a Roman senator, philosopher, and scholar who penned this work while imprisoned, awaiting execution. His personal struggle and search for meaning in the darkest of times infused the book with authenticity and depth. Now, a quick note before we dive in. This is a detailed chapter-by-chapter walkthrough, so it's going to be a longer session. Take your time with it. There's no rush. If you need to step away, save this video to your watch later or forward the link to yourself on WhatsApp so you can pick up right where you left off. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let's walk through this book together, chapter by chapter, idea by idea. Let's begin. Timeless insights into human suffering. Boethius, a Roman philosopher, wrote this while imprisoned, facing execution, infusing his work with poignant authenticity. Picture this. You're sitting in your most comfortable chair, coffee steaming beside you, about to dive into one of the most remarkable prison writings in human history. But here's the thing about The Consolation of Philosophy. It doesn't start with wisdom or profound insights. It starts exactly where you'd expect a man facing execution to begin, with raw, unfiltered despair. Imagine Boethius in his cell around the year 524. This isn't just any prisoner we're talking about. This was a man who had everything: wealth, power, respect, a loving family. He'd served as consul, the highest office in Rome. He was a scholar, a translator, someone who bridged the ancient Greek wisdom with the Roman world. And now he's sitting in a cold stone cell, stripped of everything, waiting to die on charges he knows are false. The man who once walked the halls of power now has nothing but 4 walls and his racing thoughts. So what does he do? He writes a poem, but not just any poem. He writes what scholars call the Lament. And honestly, it's one of the most heartbreaking pieces of literature you'll ever encounter. Think about the last time you felt completely overwhelmed when everything seemed to fall apart at once. Maybe you lost a job you loved, or a relationship ended unexpectedly, or you received devastating news about your health. Remember that feeling in your chest, that weight that makes it hard to breathe? That's exactly where Boethius begins his masterpiece. He opens with these haunting lines about how his poetry used to bring him joy, but now his verses are torn and weeping. Can you imagine that? Here's a man whose words once danced with intellectual pleasure, and now even his poetry is crying. He describes how his hair has turned white prematurely, how his skin hangs loose on his aging frame, and he's probably only in his 40s. Grief, he's telling us, doesn't just break your heart, it breaks your body. Now think about this for a moment. When we're in our darkest hours, what do we typically do? We reach for our phones, scroll through social media, binge-watch something, anything to distract ourselves from the pain. But Boethius does something different. He sits with his despair and writes it down, examining it like a scientist studying a specimen. There's something incredibly brave about that, isn't there? But here's where it gets really interesting. As he's pouring out his anguish, describing how fortune has turned her back on him, something unexpected happens. He begins to see a figure approaching, a woman of extraordinary beauty and dignity. This is Lady Philosophy herself, and she's not happy with what she's witnessing. Picture your wisest friend walking in on you having a complete meltdown and saying, "Okay, enough of this. We need to talk." The encounter that follows is fascinating because philosophy doesn't dismiss his pain or tell him to look on the bright side. Instead, she's almost stern with him. She asks him, essentially, is this really who you are? Is this crying, self-pitying man the same person who used to understand the deepest truths about existence? It's like she's holding up a mirror and asking him to remember himself. This reminds me of something that happens in modern therapy or even in good friendships. Sometimes when we're drowning in our own misery, we need someone to lovingly but firmly remind us of our own strength. Think about a time when you were convinced your life was over, and a friend said something like, "Hey, remember when you handled that other impossible situation? You're stronger than you think you are." What's particularly powerful about Boethius's Lament is how universal it feels. He writes about the injustice of his situation, how good people suffer while evil people prosper. Sound familiar? Turn on the news any day of the week, and you'll see variations of this same theme playing out. Honest politicians get destroyed by scandal while corrupt ones seem untouchable. Hardworking people lose their homes while schemers get rich. Small businesses close while corporations that harm communities get bailouts. But here's what makes Boethius's approach so remarkable. He doesn't just complain about injustice. He uses his personal catastrophe as a starting point for examining the biggest questions humans face. Why do bad things happen to good people? What is the nature of happiness? How do we find meaning when everything seems meaningless? These aren't abstract philosophical puzzles for him. They're matters of life and death, literally. The genius of beginning with the Lament is that it makes everything that follows feel earned. When philosophy starts offering her insights about the nature of true happiness and the illusion of worldly success, we listen because we've seen how devastating the loss of those worldly things can be. It's like watching someone climb out of a deep pit. Their advice about avoiding pits carries real weight. Consider how different our culture's approach to suffering is compared to Boethius's. We often treat pain as a problem to be solved quickly, preferably with a pill or a purchase or a vacation. But Boethius shows us something different, that our deepest suffering might actually be the doorway to our most profound wisdom. Not because suffering is good in itself, but because it strips away all the superficial things we think we need and forces us to confront what really matters. As we transition from this opening lament into the philosophical dialogue that follows, we're carrying with us the weight of genuine human pain. This isn't philosophy as an academic exercise. It's philosophy as a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. And perhaps that's exactly what makes it so powerful even today, because haven't we all, at some point, felt like we were drowning too? The stage is now set for one of the most profound conversations in Western literature, a dialogue between despair and wisdom that will transform not just Boethius, but anyone willing to listen. Picture this. You're sitting in a cold, dark prison cell, stripped of everything you once held dear. Your reputation is in tatters, your friends have abandoned you, and death looms on the horizon. This is exactly where we find Boethius in the year 524 AD, a brilliant Roman philosopher and statesman who had fallen from the highest peaks of power into the deepest valley of despair. But here's where our story takes the most extraordinary turn, because in that moment of absolute darkness, something remarkable happens. A visitor arrives who will change everything we think we know about suffering, wisdom, and what it truly means to find peace in chaos. Now imagine you're in that cell with Boethius. You've been writing poetry, pouring your heart out about the injustice of it all, when suddenly you sense a presence. You look up and there she stands. This isn't just any ordinary visitor. This is Lady Philosophy herself, personified as a woman of indescribable dignity and grace. Think about how we sometimes say that an idea came to us or that inspiration visited us. Boethius takes this metaphor and brings it to vivid, almost tangible life. Lady Philosophy appears before him as a figure both ancient and timeless. Her eyes shine with a fire that seems to see through the very fabric of reality. Her height seems to fluctuate, sometimes appearing human-sized, sometimes stretching up toward the heavens themselves. On her robes are embroidered the Greek letters pi and theta, representing practical and theoretical philosophy, connected by a ladder that suggests the journey from earthly wisdom to divine understanding. Can you imagine meeting someone who literally embodies all human knowledge and wisdom? It's like having every great teacher, every profound insight, every moment of clarity you've ever experienced walking into your darkest hour. But here's what's fascinating about this encounter. Lady Philosophy doesn't arrive with empty platitudes or hollow comfort. She's not here to pat Boethius on the head and tell him everything will be okay. Instead, she arrives like a skilled physician, ready to diagnose the real problem. Think about the last time you were truly suffering. What did you need most? Was it someone to simply agree that life was unfair? Or was it someone wise enough to help you see your situation from an entirely different perspective? Lady Philosophy immediately recognizes that Boethius has been consumed by what she calls the muses of tragedy. These are the voices in his head that keep reinforcing his victimhood, that keep telling him he's been wrong beyond measure, that life is meaningless and cruel. Now, we all know these voices, don't we? They're the ones that whisper to us during our 3 a.m. moments of despair, convincing us that our current pain defines our entire existence. They're the internal narrators that turn every setback into evidence that the universe is fundamentally broken. With the authority of someone who has guided countless souls through similar darkness, philosophy banishes these tragic muses. She essentially tells them, your services are no longer needed here. This isn't because she dismisses Boethius's pain as invalid, but because she recognizes that wallowing in that pain won't lead to any real understanding or healing. It's like having a wise friend who says, okay, I hear that you're hurting, but staying stuck in that hurt isn't going to help you find your way forward. What strikes me most about this scene is how it mirrors our modern understanding of cognitive behavioral therapy or mindfulness practices. Lady Philosophy is essentially performing an intervention, helping Boethius recognize that his suffering comes not just from external circumstances, but from how he's choosing to interpret and respond to those circumstances. Think about a time when you shifted your perspective on a difficult situation. Maybe a job loss that initially felt devastating eventually led you to a better opportunity. Maybe a relationship ending that broke your heart actually freed you to discover who you really were. The arrival of Lady Philosophy represents something profound about human nature. Even in our darkest moments, we have access to wisdom, to perspective, to ways of thinking that can transform our experience. She doesn't promise to change Boethius's external circumstances. She can't get him out of prison or restore his former position. But she offers something far more valuable, a way of understanding his situation that could restore his inner peace and dignity. Consider how this plays out in our own lives. When we're going through difficult times, we often become so focused on what we've lost or what's been taken from us that we lose sight of what remains untouchable within us. Our capacity for reason, our ability to find meaning, our connection to something larger than our immediate circumstances. These remain available to us even when everything else seems to fall apart. Lady Philosophy's presence also suggests something beautiful about the nature of wisdom itself. It's not something we have to earn or achieve through perfect circumstances. It's available to us precisely when we need it most, in the depths of our struggles. The very fact that Boethius can engage with these profound questions while facing execution suggests that our capacity for philosophical reflection might actually be heightened, not diminished, by adversity. As this first encounter unfolds, we're witnessing the beginning of one of history's most powerful explorations of how human beings can maintain their dignity and find meaning in the face of seemingly senseless suffering. Lady Philosophy has arrived not just to console, but to educate, to challenge, and ultimately to transform. She's about to take Boethius and us as readers on a journey that will question everything we think we know about fortune, happiness, and what it truly means to live a good life. The conversation that's about to begin will echo through centuries, offering guidance to anyone who has ever wondered how to make sense of a world that often seems chaotic and unfair. Picture this. You're sitting in a prison cell in 524 AD, stripped of your wealth, your position, your freedom, waiting for an execution that seems inevitable. Everything you've worked for, everything you've built, has crumbled in what feels like an instant. Now imagine that in this darkest moment, you decide to write one of the most profound explorations of human fortune ever penned. That's exactly what Boethius did, and his insights about fortune's fickle nature speak to us today just as powerfully as they did 15 centuries ago. You know that feeling when everything seems to be going wrong at once, when your carefully laid plans fall apart, when success turns to failure seemingly overnight, when what felt like solid ground beneath your feet suddenly gives way. Boethius knew that feeling intimately, and in this section of the Consolation of Philosophy, he doesn't just acknowledge our struggles with fortune's whims, he transforms our entire understanding of them. Think about how we talk about luck and fortune today. We say someone struck it rich or hit rock bottom, as if fortune were some external force randomly distributing good and bad experiences. We speak of being blessed or cursed by circumstances beyond our control. But here's where Boethius offers us something revolutionary. What if fortune isn't actually the problem we think it is? What if our entire relationship with fortune is built on a fundamental misunderstanding? Lady Philosophy, Boethius's wise companion in this dialogue, presents fortune as a character with her own voice, her own defense. And fortune's argument is startling in its honesty. She essentially says, look, I never promised you anything permanent. Change is literally what I am. My wheel never stops turning, that's not a bug, it's a feature. When I lifted you up, did you think that was permanent? When I gave you wealth, power, recognition, did you somehow miss the memo that these things are, by their very nature, temporary? Now, think about this for a moment. How many of our deepest disappointments come from expecting permanence where none was ever promised? We get a great job and assume it will last forever. We experience a period of good health and forget that our bodies are constantly changing. We enjoy a streak of success and begin to believe we've somehow transcended the ordinary rules of life. Fortune, through Boethius's brilliant characterization, reminds us that this expectation of permanence is our error, not hers. Consider the modern equivalent of Boethius's situation. Think about the tech entrepreneur who builds a billion-dollar company only to lose it all in a market crash. Or the celebrity whose career peaks and then plummets due to changing public tastes. Or closer to home, think about anyone who's experienced a sudden job loss, a health crisis, or a relationship ending. In each case, there's often this sense of betrayal. This wasn't supposed to happen to me. But fortune would ask, based on what promise? Here's where Boethius gets really interesting. He doesn't present fortune as evil or malicious. Instead, she's portrayed as fundamentally neutral, even necessary. The wheel of fortune that crushes some is the same wheel that elevates others. The instability that destroys one person's plans creates opportunities for someone else. This isn't cruelty, it's the basic operating system of temporal existence. But here's the deeper insight that makes this ancient text so relevant to our modern anxiety about uncertainty. Boethius suggests that our suffering comes not from fortune's changes themselves, but from our attachment to fortune's gifts as if they were permanent possessions. When we mistake temporary advantages for permanent securities, we set ourselves up for the very suffering we're trying to avoid. Think about how this plays out in our current culture of constant comparison and social media highlight reels. We see others experiencing fortune's favor, the perfect job, the ideal relationship, the enviable lifestyle, and we either feel inadequate because we lack these things, or we achieve them and live in constant fear of losing them. Either way, we're trapped in a relationship with fortune that guarantees suffering. Boethius offers us a different way. What if, instead of trying to hold onto fortune's gifts with white knuckles, we learn to receive them lightly? What if we could enjoy good fortune without becoming dependent on it, and endure bad fortune without being crushed by it? This isn't about becoming emotionally detached or cynical. It's about understanding the true nature of what we're dealing with. Consider this powerful analogy that emerges from Boethius's thinking. Fortune is like weather. We don't take sunny days personally as a sign of cosmic approval, nor do we interpret storms as punishment for our moral failures. We dress appropriately for the conditions, we plan around the forecast when we can, and we accept that weather patterns are largely beyond our control. What if we approached the ups and downs of life with this same practical wisdom? The really profound shift here is moving from asking, "Why is this happening to me?" to asking, "How can I respond wisely to what's happening?" The first question assumes that fortune owes us an explanation or that good fortune should be permanent. The second question acknowledges fortune's nature while focusing on what remains within our control, our response. This doesn't mean becoming passive or fatalistic. Boethius isn't suggesting we stop trying to improve our circumstances or that we should be indifferent to outcomes. Rather, he's pointing toward a kind of engaged detachment. We can work toward goals and prefer certain outcomes while holding lightly to results we cannot ultimately control. As we prepare to explore how philosophy will guide Boethius toward even deeper insights about true happiness and the nature of the good, we carry with us this fundamental reorientation toward fortune. Understanding her fickle nature isn't the end of wisdom, it's the beginning. It's the foundation that allows us to build something more stable than anything fortune's wheel could ever provide or take away. Picture this. You're sitting in a Roman prison cell in the year 524, stripped of everything you once held dear. Your wealth, gone. Your prestigious position in government, vanished. Your freedom, taken away. Your reputation, destroyed by false accusations. If anyone had a right to despair about happiness, it would be Boethius. Yet it's precisely in this darkest moment that he discovers something profound about what true happiness actually is. And honestly, what he learns in that cell might just revolutionize how you think about your own pursuit of happiness. You know how we're constantly chasing after things we think will make us happy. That promotion, that relationship, that perfect house, that dream vacation. Boethius had all of those things and more. He was wealthy beyond measure, held one of the highest positions in the Roman government, had a loving family, and enjoyed immense respect. By any modern standard, he had won at life. So when Lady Philosophy appears to him in his cell, you might expect her to comfort him by promising he'll get all those things back. Instead, she does something far more radical. She challenges everything he thought he knew about happiness itself. Think about this for a moment. What if the very things we're desperately pursuing in our quest for happiness are actually leading us away from it? Lady Philosophy suggests that we've been looking for happiness in all the wrong places, like someone searching for their keys under a streetlight, not because that's where they dropped them, but because the light is better there. We chase external goods because they're visible, measurable, and seem so obviously connected to happiness. But what if that connection is an illusion? Here's where Boethius's insight becomes startling. Lady Philosophy argues that anything that can be taken away from you cannot be the source of true happiness. Now, let's sit with that for a second. Your job can be taken away. Your money can disappear. Your health can fail. Even your relationships, as painful as it is to acknowledge, can end. If your happiness depends on these things, then your happiness is essentially held hostage by circumstances beyond your control. You're building your emotional foundation on shifting sand. But there's something deeper here that connects directly to our modern struggle with happiness. We live in a culture that's absolutely obsessed with optimization. We track our steps, our sleep, our productivity, our net worth. We're constantly measuring and comparing, always convinced that happiness is just one more achievement away. Social media feeds us an endless stream of other people's highlight reels, making us feel like we're falling behind in some cosmic happiness race. Sound familiar? Boethius would look at our modern anxiety and nod knowingly. He understood that when we make our happiness dependent on external circumstances, we become like leaves in the wind, blown around by forces beyond our control. One day the stock market is up and we feel great. The next day it's down and we're anxious. One day someone likes our post and we feel validated. The next day we're ignored and we feel forgotten. This isn't happiness, It's emotional whiplash. So what does Lady Philosophy propose instead? She introduces Boethius to the concept of true happiness, which she calls the highest good. And here's the beautiful part. True happiness isn't something you achieve or acquire. It's something you recognize was already within you all along. Think of it like this. You know how sometimes you're searching frantically for your glasses while they're sitting on top of your head. True happiness is like those glasses. You already have what you're looking for. You just don't realize it. True happiness, according to Lady Philosophy, comes from aligning yourself with what's eternal and unchanging, rather than what's temporary and fluctuating. It's found in wisdom, in virtue, in understanding your place in the grand scheme of things. It's the deep satisfaction that comes from living according to your highest values, regardless of whether the world rewards you for it or not. Now you might be thinking, that sounds nice in theory, but I still need to pay my bills and live in the real world. And you're absolutely right. Lady Philosophy isn't suggesting we become detached hermits who don't care about anything. She's suggesting something much more nuanced and practical. She's saying that we can engage fully with life while not making our inner peace dependent on life's outcomes. Consider this modern parallel. Think about someone you know who seems genuinely content regardless of their circumstances. Maybe it's that teacher who loves their work despite modest pay, or that friend who radiates calm even during stressful times. These people have often discovered what Boethius learned in his prison cell, that happiness isn't about getting what you want, but about wanting what you have in the deepest sense. There's a beautiful paradox here that Lady Philosophy reveals. When you stop chasing happiness as an external goal, you often find yourself becoming genuinely happy. When you stop trying to control outcomes and instead focus on your response to whatever comes, you discover a kind of freedom that no external circumstance can touch. It's like that old saying about how the tighter you squeeze sand, the more it slips through your fingers, but hold your hand open and it stays put. This doesn't mean becoming passive or accepting injustice. Boethius himself was fighting corruption when he was imprisoned. Rather, it means finding your center in something that can't be shaken by external storms. It means building your happiness on the bedrock of character and wisdom rather than the shifting sands of circumstance. As we move deeper into Boethius's journey of understanding, we'll see how this foundation of true happiness becomes the launching point for even greater insights about fortune, fate, and freedom. But for now, let's sit with this revolutionary idea, that the happiness you've been seeking in the world might actually be waiting for you to discover it within yourself. And perhaps, like Boethius in his cell, your greatest challenges might just be the doorway to your deepest understanding of what it means to be truly happy. Picture this. You're sitting in a medieval prison cell, stripped of everything you once held dear, your wealth, your position, your freedom. And yet somehow, in that darkest moment, you discover something profound about what it truly means to be happy. This is exactly where we find Boethius as he explores one of philosophy's most enduring questions. What role does virtue play in achieving genuine happiness? Now think about this for a moment. When most of us imagine happiness, what comes to mind? Maybe it's that promotion you've been chasing, the perfect relationship, financial security, or perhaps that dream vacation you've been planning. But here's where Boethius, speaking through his mysterious visitor philosophy herself, challenges everything we think we know about contentment and fulfillment. Philosophy begins with a simple but revolutionary idea. True happiness cannot depend on anything external that can be taken away from us. She uses a beautiful metaphor that still resonates today. Imagine trying to build your house on shifting sand versus solid rock. External goods like wealth, fame, or even physical health are like that shifting sand. They can disappear in an instant, leaving us devastated and empty. But virtue is the bedrock that remains steady, no matter what storms rage around us. Let me tell you a story that illustrates this perfectly. Imagine two people facing the same devastating setback. Let's say they both lose their jobs unexpectedly. The first person, who has built their entire sense of self-worth around their career and salary, crumbles completely. Their identity is shattered because it was entirely dependent on external validation. But the second person, who has cultivated virtues like resilience, compassion, and wisdom, while certainly disappointed, finds ways to help others in similar situations, learns new skills, and discovers opportunities they never would have considered before. Which person do you think experiences greater peace, even in difficulty? This is what Boethius means when he argues that virtue is not just connected to happiness, it is happiness. It's a radical shift in thinking that turns our modern consumer culture completely on its head. We're constantly told that happiness is something we acquire, purchase, or achieve through external means. But philosophy suggests that happiness is something we already possess within ourselves, waiting to be cultivated and expressed through virtuous action. Now you might be thinking, that sounds nice in theory, but what does virtue actually look like in practice? Boethius doesn't leave us hanging with abstract concepts. He breaks down virtue into its classical components: wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. But here's the beautiful thing. These aren't dusty museum pieces from ancient Rome. They're as relevant today as they were 1,500 years ago. Take wisdom, for instance. In our information age, we're drowning in data but often starving for true understanding. Wisdom isn't about knowing everything. It's about discerning what truly matters. It's the difference between scrolling mindlessly through social media for hours and choosing to have a meaningful conversation with a friend. It's recognizing that the latest controversy dominating the news cycle probably won't matter in 5 years, but the character we're building today absolutely will. Courage, meanwhile, isn't just about heroic acts on battlefields. It's the quiet bravery of speaking up for what's right when everyone else stays silent. It's the strength to be vulnerable in relationships, to admit when we're wrong, to try something new despite the risk of failure. Think about the courage it takes to choose integrity over profit, or to stand by your principles even when it's costly. Justice goes far beyond legal systems and courtrooms. It's about treating every person with dignity, regardless of their social status, political views, or how they can benefit us. In our polarized world, justice might look like really listening to someone whose opinions differ from ours, or using our privileges to lift up those who have fewer opportunities. And temperance. In a culture of excess and instant gratification, temperance is revolutionary. It's choosing quality over quantity, depth over surface-level pleasures. It's enjoying a glass of wine without needing the whole bottle, or savoring a meaningful friendship instead of collecting hundreds of shallow social media connections. But here's where Boethius gets really interesting. He argues that these virtues aren't separate qualities we need to develop independently. They're all interconnected, like facets of a single diamond. You can't truly have courage without wisdom to guide it, or justice without the temperance to apply it fairly. When we cultivate one virtue, we naturally strengthen the others. Philosophy also makes a striking claim that challenges our competitive, achievement-oriented mindset. Virtue is its own reward. Unlike external goods, which lose their value when shared or when others possess them too, virtue actually increases when it's shared. When you act with kindness, you don't have less kindness, you have more. When you demonstrate courage, you don't deplete some finite courage reservoir, you build your capacity for future brave acts. Consider how this plays out in modern life. That colleague who consistently chooses integrity over shortcuts isn't just more respected by others. They sleep better at night, feel more confident in their decisions, and build a reputation that opens doors no amount of scheming ever could. The parent who models patience and compassion doesn't just raise better children, they become more patient and compassionate themselves. This is why virtue leads to genuine happiness, while external pursuits often leave us feeling empty. External achievements are like sugar rushes. They provide temporary highs followed by inevitable crashes that leave us craving more. But virtue is like good nutrition for the soul. It provides sustained energy and genuine satisfaction that doesn't depend on constantly acquiring more. As we prepare to dive deeper into how this ancient wisdom applies to our modern struggles with meaning and purpose, remember this. Boethius wrote these words while facing execution, having lost everything the world told him should make him happy. Yet in that prison cell, through the cultivation of virtue and philosophical reflection, he discovered a form of contentment that no external force could touch. That's not just beautiful. It's profoundly practical wisdom for anyone navigating the uncertainties and challenges of human existence. Picture this. You're sitting in a dimly lit prison cell, waiting for your execution, and instead of despair consuming you, you find yourself having the most profound conversation about the nature of God that humanity has ever recorded. That's exactly where Boethius found himself in the early 6th century, and it's where we find ourselves now as we dive deeper into his extraordinary dialogue with Lady Philosophy about the very essence of the divine. Now think about this for a moment. When someone asks you about God, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Most of us might think about power or love or perhaps that bearded figure from Renaissance paintings. But Boethius, guided by philosophy herself, takes us on a completely different journey. He doesn't start with what God does, but with what God fundamentally is. And here's where it gets fascinating. Philosophy poses a question that seems almost ridiculously simple at first glance. What is the highest good? It's like asking what's the best flavor of ice cream, except the stakes are infinitely higher. Boethius initially stumbles around with answers that sound reasonable enough. Maybe it's happiness, perhaps it's virtue. But philosophy, with the patience of a master teacher, shows him that he's thinking too small, too human. Imagine you're looking at a magnificent cathedral from street level. You see the beautiful facade, the intricate stonework, the soaring spires. But then someone takes you up in a helicopter, and suddenly you see the entire structure, how every piece fits together, how it relates to the surrounding city, how it's part of something much grander. That's what philosophy does for Boethius when she reveals that God isn't just the highest good among many goods, but is goodness itself, the very source and definition of what it means to be good. Here's where Boethius blows our minds with an insight that feels startlingly modern. He argues that God doesn't possess goodness the way you might possess a car or a talent for music. Instead, God simply is goodness, in the same way that water is wet or fire is hot. It's not an attribute that could be separated or lost. It's the fundamental nature of divine being itself. Think about how revolutionary this is. We're so used to thinking about qualities as things we have or don't have. You have intelligence, you have kindness, you have a sense of humor. But what if there was something that didn't just have these qualities but was the very essence of them? This leads philosophy to one of the most beautiful arguments in all of philosophical literature. If God is perfect goodness itself, then God must also be perfect happiness, perfect power, perfect knowledge, and perfect everything else that we consider truly valuable. Why? Because if these were separate things, then God would be lacking something, would need something external to be complete. But perfection, by definition, cannot lack anything. Now you might be thinking, this sounds awfully abstract. What does this have to do with my daily life? Here's where Boethius becomes surprisingly practical. Consider how we chase after happiness in our modern world. We think if we just get the right job, the perfect relationship, the ideal house, then we'll be truly happy. We're essentially treating happiness as something external that we can acquire and possess. But what if happiness isn't something you get but something you participate in? What if, by aligning ourselves with that perfect goodness that is God, we're not earning happiness but discovering our natural connection to it? Think about those moments in your life when you felt most genuinely fulfilled. I'm willing to bet it wasn't when you acquired something, but when you were part of something larger than yourself. Maybe it was helping someone in need, creating something beautiful, or experiencing a moment of profound connection with another person or with nature. In those moments, you weren't possessing goodness, you were participating in it. Boethius takes this insight even further with an argument that might surprise you. He suggests that everything that exists participates in being itself, and that being itself flows from God. It's like a vast river system where every stream, no matter how small, ultimately connects to the same source. The difference is that while we participate in goodness imperfectly and partially, God is the fullness of goodness itself. This has profound implications for how we understand suffering and evil, questions that tormented Boethius in his prison cell. If God is perfect goodness and the source of all being, then evil isn't some competing force in the universe. Instead, evil is more like darkness, which isn't really a thing in itself but simply the absence of light. Evil is the absence or corruption of goodness, not its opposite. This doesn't make suffering less real or painful, but it does change how we understand its place in the cosmic order. What's remarkable is how this ancient insight speaks to our contemporary struggles with meaning and purpose. In our age of anxiety and division, when we often feel like we're adrift in a meaningless universe, Boethius offers us a vision where everything is connected to an ultimate source of goodness and meaning. Not in some distant, disconnected way, but intimately and immediately. As we sit with these profound insights, we begin to see that Boethius isn't just offering us abstract theology. He's providing a framework for understanding our deepest longings and our highest aspirations. When we hunger for justice, we're participating in divine justice. When we create beauty, we're reflecting divine creativity. When we love truly and selflessly, we're embodying divine love. This vision of God's nature becomes the foundation for everything else philosophy will teach Boethius about providence, free will, and the meaning of human existence. It's the bedrock upon which he'll build his understanding of how a good God can permit suffering, and how we can find consolation even in our darkest hours. Because if God is goodness itself, then our connection to that goodness is not something that can be ultimately severed by fortune, by circumstances, or even by death itself. Picture yourself sitting in a medieval prison cell, stripped of everything you once held dear, and suddenly finding yourself face to face with one of the most profound questions humanity has ever wrestled with. This is exactly where we find Boethius as he grapples with what might be the ultimate puzzle of human existence, the relationship between fate and divine providence. And honestly, as we sit here with our coffee, this ancient question feels remarkably fresh, doesn't it? Now think about this for a moment. How many times have you heard someone say, "It was meant to be," when something unexpected happens? Or perhaps you've caught yourself wondering whether that job rejection, that chance meeting, or that sudden opportunity was just random luck or part of some greater plan. Boethius, writing from his prison cell 1500 years ago, was wrestling with these very same questions, but with the precision of a master philosopher and the urgency of a man facing his final days. Lady Philosophy, that mysterious figure who has been Boethius's guide throughout this journey, begins to untangle what seems like an impossible knot. She explains that most people confuse fate and providence, treating them as if they're the same thing, when in reality they operate on completely different levels. Think of it this way. Imagine you're standing on the observation deck of a skyscraper, looking down at the busy streets below. From your vantage point, you can see the entire pattern of traffic, the flow of pedestrians, the way everything interconnects. But down on the street level, each driver only sees the car in front of them. Each pedestrian only knows their immediate next step. Providence, Lady Philosophy explains, is like that view from the skyscraper. It's the eternal, unchanging perspective of the divine mind, seeing all of time and space as a single, perfect whole. From this divine viewpoint, everything makes sense, everything has its place, and everything serves a purpose in the grand design. But here's where it gets fascinating. This divine perspective doesn't impose itself on reality like some cosmic dictator. Instead, it's more like a master artist who can see the finished masterpiece while still allowing each brushstroke to be painted freely. Fate, on the other hand, is what we experience down here on the street level. It's the unfolding of that divine plan through time, through the natural order of things, through the choices and actions of countless individuals. Fate is providence in motion, you might say. It's the temporal expression of an eternal design. When you get that unexpected phone call that changes your career path, when you miss your usual train and end up meeting the love of your life on the next one, when a seemingly random conversation opens up possibilities you never imagined, that's fate working through the ordinary mechanics of existence. But here's where Boethius's insight becomes truly revolutionary. He's not suggesting that we're all just puppets dancing to predetermined strings. Instead, he's painting a picture of reality where divine foreknowledge and human freedom can coexist. Think about watching a movie you've seen many times before. You know exactly what's going to happen, every plot twist, every character decision, every outcome. But does your knowledge of the story somehow force the characters to act as they do? Of course not. The characters are still making their choices within the story, even though you, from your outside perspective, already know what those choices will be. This is remarkably similar to how Boethius describes the relationship between divine providence and human choice. God's eternal perspective allows for complete foreknowledge without eliminating genuine human freedom. We're not robots following a program. We're more like characters in a story that's being written by the greatest author imaginable, one who can craft a perfect narrative while still allowing each character to make authentic choices. Now you might be thinking, this sounds beautiful in theory, but what about when life feels completely chaotic? What about suffering, injustice, random tragedies? Boethius doesn't shy away from these hard questions. Remember, he's writing this while awaiting execution, having lost his wealth, position, and freedom. If anyone had reason to doubt the existence of a benevolent divine plan, it would be him. But here's his remarkable insight. What we perceive as chaos or injustice often stems from our limited perspective. We're like someone looking at a tiny section of a vast tapestry, seeing only a few threads and wondering how they could possibly contribute to anything beautiful. But step back far enough, and those seemingly random threads reveal themselves as essential parts of an intricate design. Consider how this plays out in our modern world. A company downsizing might seem like pure misfortune to the employees affected, but it might lead one person to start their own business, another to discover a passion they never knew they had, and another to spend precious time with family they'd been neglecting. The immediate experience is genuinely difficult, but the larger pattern might reveal purposes that weren't visible at first. This doesn't mean we should be passive in the face of hardship or accept injustice with a shrug. Boethius isn't advocating for fatalism here. Instead, he's suggesting that understanding the relationship between fate and providence can give us a different kind of strength. When we recognize that our immediate circumstances, however challenging, are part of a larger pattern that ultimately tends toward good, we can face difficulties with greater resilience and hope. The practical wisdom here is profound. Instead of feeling like victims of random circumstances or prisoners of an inflexible destiny, we can see ourselves as participants in a cosmic story that's both meaningful and ongoing. Our choices matter precisely because they're woven into this larger tapestry. Every act of kindness, every moment of courage, every decision to seek truth or beauty or justice contributes to the unfolding of providence through fate. As we close this exploration, consider how this ancient wisdom might transform your perspective on the unexpected turns in your own life. Perhaps that setback you're facing isn't just bad luck, and perhaps that opportunity that's opening up isn't just good fortune. Maybe they're both part of a larger story that's still being written, one in which your authentic choices and genuine efforts play an irreplaceable role in bringing something beautiful into being. Picture this: you're sitting in a medieval prison cell stripped of everything you once held dear. Your wealth gone, your political power vanished, your friends nowhere to be found. Most people would be consumed by rage, despair, or bitter resentment. But what if, in that darkest moment, you discovered something profound about the nature of control itself? This is exactly where we find Boethius, and it's where one of philosophy's most powerful lessons begins to unfold. Now, before we dive deeper, let me ask you something. How much of your day do you spend worrying about things that are completely outside your control? The weather ruining your weekend plans, your boss's unpredictable mood, whether your flight will be delayed, or if that important email will get a response. If you're like most of us, probably more time than you'd care to admit. Boethius, writing from his prison cell in the 6th century, was grappling with this very same human tendency, but on a much more dramatic scale. Lady Philosophy, his ethereal guide through this mental labyrinth, begins to show him something revolutionary about the nature of control. She doesn't start with grand philosophical pronouncements, but rather with a simple observation that cuts right to the heart of human suffering. Think about this for a moment. Most of our anxiety, frustration, and despair comes not from what actually happens to us, but from our desperate attempts to control things that were never ours to control in the first place. Consider how this plays out in modern life. You've probably experienced that sinking feeling when you check your phone obsessively, waiting for someone to text you back. Or maybe you've lost sleep over a job interview, replaying every word you said, wondering if you should have answered differently. Here's what's fascinating. Boethius realized that this kind of mental torment was entirely self-imposed. The other person's response, the interviewer's decision, the outcome of events, these things exist in a realm completely separate from our influence, yet we exhaust ourselves trying to control them. Lady Philosophy uses a beautiful metaphor that still resonates today. She describes fortune as a wheel, constantly turning, sometimes lifting people up, sometimes bringing them down. Now, you might think this sounds fatalistic, but here's where it gets interesting. The insight isn't that we're powerless victims of circumstance. Rather, it's that our suffering comes from trying to stop the wheel from turning, from demanding that good fortune stay permanently in place, or from raging against inevitable change. Think about someone you know who got laid off from what seemed like a secure job. Initially, there's shock, anger, maybe even a sense of betrayal. But how often have you heard these same people say, months or years later, that losing that job was the best thing that ever happened to them? They discovered new careers, started businesses, or simply found work that actually fulfilled them. The external event, the job loss, was completely outside their control. But their response to it, their ability to adapt and find new opportunities, that was entirely within their power. This brings us to one of Boethius's most profound insights about the illusion of control. He realized that we often mistake our temporary ability to influence outcomes with actual control over them. It's like being a passenger on a ship who thinks they're steering because they can walk around on deck. The ship's direction, the weather, the ocean currents, these are all beyond the passenger's control, but they can still choose how to spend their time during the voyage. Let's make this even more concrete. Imagine you're a parent watching your teenager make choices you disagree with. You can lecture, you can set boundaries, you can even impose consequences, but ultimately, you cannot control their thoughts, their values, or their decisions. The parent who recognizes this limitation actually becomes more effective, not less. They stop wasting energy on impossible control and instead focus on what they actually can influence: their own responses, their own example, and the quality of their relationship with their child. Boethius discovered that this recognition isn't depressing, it's actually liberating. When Lady Philosophy helped him see that his imprisonment, his fall from grace, even his impending execution were all external events over which he had no control, something remarkable happened. Instead of feeling defeated, he felt freed. Freed from the exhausting burden of trying to manage an unmanageable universe. Now, you might be wondering, does this mean we should just become passive and accept everything that happens to us? Absolutely not. And this is where Boethius's wisdom becomes even more nuanced. He's not advocating for resignation or apathy. Instead, he's pointing toward a more intelligent way of engaging with life. When you clearly distinguish between what you can and cannot control, you actually become more effective at both. Consider an athlete preparing for competition. They can control their training, their diet, their mental preparation, and their effort during the event. They cannot control their opponent's performance, the weather conditions, or the judge's decisions. The athlete who focuses obsessively on the uncontrollable factors will likely perform worse than one who channels all their energy into the elements within their influence. This isn't just sports psychology, it's life philosophy. What makes this ancient wisdom so relevant today is that our modern world has actually amplified the illusion of control. Social media makes us feel like we should be able to manage our image perfectly. Technology gives us the sense that we should be able to solve any problem instantly. The abundance of choices in everything from career paths to breakfast cereals creates the exhausting expectation that we should optimize every decision. Boethius reminds us that this is all an elaborate mirage. The executive who thinks their success is entirely due to their brilliant strategies often discovers how little control they actually had when market forces shift overnight. The person who carefully curates their online presence to project success and happiness may find that real contentment has nothing to do with external validation. As we prepare to explore how this understanding of control connects to Boethius's insights about true happiness and the nature of the good life, remember this. Recognizing the limits of our control isn't about giving up power. It's about discovering where our real power actually lies. And that discovery, as Boethius learned in his darkest hour, might just be the key to a kind of freedom that no external circumstance can ever take away. Picture this. You're sitting in a prison cell, stripped of everything you once held dear, your wealth, your status, your freedom, even your good name. The world has turned against you, and everything you worked for seems to have crumbled into dust. Now imagine that in this darkest moment, a radiant woman appears before you, claiming to be philosophy herself, ready to heal your wounded spirit. This is exactly where we find Boethius as he grapples with one of humanity's most profound questions. What truly matters when everything temporary falls away? Let me pour you another cup of coffee, because we're about to dive into something that will completely shift how you think about success, happiness, and what's really worth pursuing in life. Boethius, writing from his prison cell in the 6th century, discovered something remarkable about the difference between the temporary gains we chase and the eternal truths that actually sustain us. And here's the beautiful thing. His insights are just as relevant today as they were 1,500 years ago. Think about the last time you achieved something you'd been working toward for months or years. Maybe it was a promotion, a new house, a relationship milestone, or even something as simple as finally buying that gadget you'd been wanting. Remember that initial rush of satisfaction. Now be honest with yourself. How long did that feeling actually last? A week? A month? If you're like most people, that high probably faded faster than you expected, leaving you looking toward the next goal, the next achievement, the next temporary fix. This is precisely what philosophy reveals to Boethius in their dialogue. She shows him that all worldly goods, wealth, power, fame, even physical pleasures, share one fatal flaw: they're temporary. They come and go like waves on a shore, and no matter how tightly we try to grasp them, they inevitably slip through our fingers. But here's where it gets interesting. Philosophy doesn't just point out this problem. She reveals why we keep making the same mistake over and over again. Imagine you're looking at a beautiful painting, but you're standing so close that your nose is almost touching the canvas. All you can see are individual brushstrokes, patches of color, maybe some texture. You might think you're seeing the whole picture, but you're actually missing the masterpiece entirely. This is how Boethius describes our relationship with temporary pleasures and worldly success. We're standing so close to these fleeting experiences that we mistake them for the whole of reality. Now, what happens when you step back from that painting? Suddenly, the individual brushstrokes resolve into something magnificent, a complete image that makes sense, that moves you, that reveals the artist's true intention. This stepping back, this shift in perspective, is exactly what philosophy offers Boethius, and what his work offers us today. Consider how this plays out in our modern world. We live in an age of unprecedented material abundance, yet anxiety and depression rates are skyrocketing. We have more ways to connect with others than ever before, yet loneliness is being called an epidemic. We can access virtually any information instantly, yet many people feel more confused and uncertain than previous generations. Why is this happening? Boethius would say it's because we're still standing too close to the painting, mistaking temporary gains for lasting fulfillment. Let's get concrete about this. Take social media, for instance. Every like, share, or comment gives us a little hit of validation, a temporary gain that feels good in the moment. But notice how quickly you need the next hit, and the next one after that. The satisfaction never lasts because it's based on something external, something that can be taken away at any moment. One algorithm change, one controversial post, one shift in public opinion, and suddenly that source of validation disappears. Philosophy teaches Boethius to recognize these patterns, not to become pessimistic, but to redirect his attention toward what she calls eternal truths. Now, you might be wondering, what exactly are these eternal truths? Are we talking about abstract philosophical concepts that have no bearing on daily life? Not at all. These eternal truths are actually the most practical things in the world. Think about the qualities in people that you most admire, qualities like wisdom, compassion, integrity, courage, or the ability to find joy even in difficult circumstances. Notice something interesting about these traits. They can't be taken away by external circumstances. A person can lose their job, their health, even their freedom, but their capacity for kindness, their hard-won wisdom, their inner strength, these remain intact. In fact, they often grow stronger under pressure. Here's a modern example that perfectly illustrates this principle. Consider someone like Nelson Mandela, who spent 27 years in prison. By any worldly measure, those should have been the most devastating decades of his life. He lost his freedom, his prime years, his ability to be with his family. Yet those prison years became the crucible that forged him into one of the most respected leaders in human history. The temporary loss of worldly goods revealed and strengthened the eternal qualities within him. But you don't need to be a historical figure to experience this transformation. Think about the people in your own life who seem to have an unshakable sense of peace and purpose. They might not be the wealthiest or most successful by conventional standards, but there's something about them that feels solid, reliable, enduring. They've learned to invest their energy in developing qualities and relationships that can't be taken away by changing circumstances. This is what philosophy means when she talks about turning from the temporal to the eternal. She's not asking us to become monks or to reject all worldly pleasures. She's inviting us to reorder our priorities, to recognize that while temporary gains can be enjoyed, they should never be the foundation of our happiness or sense of self-worth. The practical wisdom here is profound. When you build your life primarily on temporary things, your appearance, your bank account, your status symbols, even your current relationships or health, you're essentially building your house on sand. Every setback becomes an existential crisis because your entire identity is tied up in things that are inherently unstable. But when you invest primarily in eternal qualities, in becoming wiser, more compassionate, more resilient, more capable of genuine love and service, you're building on bedrock. External circumstances can still affect you, but they can't destroy you because your core self is rooted in something that transcends temporary conditions. As we wrap up this exploration, I want you to consider this question. If you knew that everything you currently consider important could be taken away tomorrow, what would remain? What aspects of yourself and your life would still be there, still be valuable, still be worth celebrating? Those things, whatever they are for you, point toward the eternal truths that philosophy wants us to recognize and cultivate. This isn't about becoming detached from the world or stopping your pursuit of goals and dreams. It's about understanding the proper relationship between temporary gains and eternal truths, so that you can enjoy the former without being enslaved by them, while building your life on the foundation of the latter. And that, my friend, is wisdom that never goes out of style. Picture yourself sitting in a prison cell, stripped of everything you once held dear. Your wealth gone, your position of power vanished, your reputation destroyed by false accusations. The very people you served have turned against you, and death looms on the horizon. What would sustain you in those darkest moments? For Boethius, writing in the shadow of his own execution, the answer was profound and transformative. Wisdom itself becomes our greatest companion in suffering. When we think about suffering today, we often reach for quick fixes, distractions, or temporary comforts. We binge-watch shows, scroll through social media, or lose ourselves in shopping sprees, anything to avoid sitting with our pain. But Boethius discovered something remarkable during his imprisonment. He found that wisdom doesn't eliminate suffering, it transforms our relationship with it entirely. Think about this for a moment. What if your greatest struggles could become your most profound teachers? Boethius introduces us to Lady Philosophy, who appears to him as a majestic figure whose robes are torn by those who have misunderstood her teachings. She's not some abstract concept floating in ivory towers, but a practical guide who meets us exactly where we are, in the depths of our confusion and pain. When she first encounters Boethius, he's wallowing in self-pity, writing sorrowful poetry about his misfortunes. Her response is both gentle and firm, like a wise friend who refuses to let you stay stuck in destructive patterns. The first insight she offers is startling in its simplicity. We suffer not because of what happens to us, but because of how we think about what happens to us. Now, before you roll your eyes and think this sounds like shallow positive thinking, stay with me here. Boethius isn't suggesting we simply think happy thoughts and pretend everything is fine. He's pointing to something much deeper, a fundamental shift in how we understand the nature of reality itself. Consider this modern parallel. Imagine you're stuck in traffic, late for an important meeting. One person might rage at the delay, their blood pressure rising, their day ruined before it's barely begun. Another person might use the same traffic jam as an opportunity for reflection, perhaps listening to music they love or simply observing the world around them with curiosity. The external circumstance is identical, but the internal experience is completely different. The difference lies in the wisdom each person brings to the moment. Lady Philosophy guides Boethius through a series of profound realizations about the nature of fortune, happiness, and human purpose. She shows him that what we typically consider good fortune, wealth, power, fame, even health, are actually neutral in themselves. They can just as easily become sources of corruption and anxiety as they can bring genuine satisfaction. Have you ever noticed how lottery winners often report being less happy after their windfall? Or how celebrities frequently struggle with depression despite having everything our culture tells us should make them happy? The wisdom Boethius discovers teaches us to distinguish between what the Stoics would later call preferred indifference and true goods. Money, for instance, is useful and generally preferable to poverty, but it's not inherently good or evil. True good lies in things that cannot be taken from us: our capacity for wisdom, love, courage, and integrity. These internal treasures remain ours regardless of external circumstances. But here's where Boethius goes beyond mere Stoic endurance. He doesn't just teach us to grit our teeth and bear suffering with dignity, though that's certainly part of it. He reveals that suffering, properly understood, can actually accelerate our spiritual and intellectual growth in ways that comfort never could. Think about the people you most admire, those who possess real depth and wisdom. Chances are, they've walked through fire and emerged transformed, not unscathed but strengthened. Lady Philosophy explains this through the metaphor of medicine. When we're seriously ill, we don't curse the doctor for prescribing bitter medicine or painful treatments. We understand that healing sometimes requires temporary discomfort. Similarly, the difficulties life presents to us often serve as medicine for the soul, burning away illusions and false attachments that keep us from experiencing true freedom and peace. This perspective radically reframes how we approach challenges. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" we might learn to ask, "What is this teaching me?" Or "How is this invitation to grow?" A job loss might reveal our over-identification with external success and push us toward more meaningful work. A health crisis might awaken us to what truly matters in life. A betrayal might teach us discernment and self-reliance while deepening our capacity for forgiveness. Boethius also explores the profound consolation that comes from understanding our place in the larger cosmic order. When we're caught up in our personal dramas, everything feels monumentally important and urgent. But wisdom provides perspective, showing us that our individual struggles, while real and significant, are part of a much grander tapestry. This doesn't minimize our pain, but it places it in context, preventing us from drowning in it. The practical application of these insights is transformative. When we cultivate wisdom as our primary response to difficulty, we develop what psychologists today might call resilience, but it's deeper than that. We develop an unshakable core that remains calm in the storm, not because we're numb to pain, but because we understand its temporary nature and potential value. As we prepare to explore how Boethius applies these philosophical insights to specific life challenges, remember that wisdom isn't something we acquire once and possess forever. It's a practice, a way of engaging with each moment that requires constant cultivation and renewal. The consolation of philosophy isn't a one-time revelation, but a daily choice to meet whatever arises with curiosity, courage, and the deep knowing that within every difficulty lies an invitation to become more fully human. Picture this. You're sitting there with your morning coffee, scrolling through the news, and it hits you like a punch to the gut. Another story about corruption going unpunished, another tale of good people suffering while the wicked seem to prosper. You shake your head and mutter what humans have been muttering for thousands of years. Where's the justice in this world? Well, my friend, you're in excellent company, because that's exactly the question that was tormenting Boethius as he sat in his prison cell, waiting for an execution that would come all too soon. Now here's where things get fascinating. Lady Philosophy, that magnificent personification of wisdom who's been visiting our imprisoned scholar, doesn't just pat him on the head and say, there, life's unfair." No, she's about to turn his entire understanding of justice completely upside down. And in doing so, she's going to challenge everything we think we know about fairness, punishment, and what it really means to get what we deserve. Think about this for a moment. When we look at the world and cry injustice, what are we really saying? We're saying that the universe isn't operating according to our moral scorecard. The good guys should win, the bad guys should lose, and everyone should get their comeuppance in neat, observable packages. But Lady Philosophy poses a question that cuts right to the heart of our assumptions. What if our understanding of justice is like looking at a massive tapestry from the backside, where all we can see are tangled threads and loose ends? Boethius, like any reasonable person, points to the obvious examples. Here he is, a man who dedicated his life to public service and philosophical truth, sitting in a dungeon on trumped-up charges. Meanwhile, the very people who orchestrated his downfall are living in luxury and wielding power. Where's the cosmic justice in that? It's the same question we ask when we see a teacher struggling to pay rent, while a social media influencer makes millions, or when a dedicated nurse works 3 jobs while a corrupt politician retires wealthy. But here's where Lady Philosophy drops her first bombshell. She suggests that we're looking at this all wrong. What if the wicked aren't actually getting away with anything? What if, in fact, they're receiving exactly the punishment they deserve, only we're too limited in our perspective to see it? Now, before you roll your eyes and think this is just philosophical wordplay, stay with me, because this insight is more profound than it first appears. Lady Philosophy explains that true justice isn't about external rewards and punishments. It's about the internal state of the soul. When someone chooses evil, they don't escape consequences. They become the consequence. Every act of cruelty, every choice to prioritize power over principle, every decision to harm others for personal gain, These don't just harm the victims, they fundamentally corrupt the perpetrator. The wicked person doesn't avoid punishment. They become their own punishment, trapped in a soul that's increasingly incapable of experiencing genuine happiness, peace, or fulfillment. Think about it this way. Imagine someone who lies constantly. We might think they're getting away with it if they're never caught, but what's really happening? They're creating a reality where they can never trust anyone else, where they're always looking over their shoulder, where they've lost the ability to form authentic relationships. The punishment isn't external, it's written into the very fabric of their choices. They've traded their capacity for genuine connection for temporary advantages, and that's a devastating loss, even if they don't recognize it. This perspective completely reframes how we understand those moments when good people suffer. Lady Philosophy doesn't dismiss this suffering as unreal or unimportant. Instead, she suggests that when good people face hardship, something entirely different is happening. For the virtuous person, external suffering can actually serve as a kind of strengthening, like how a muscle grows stronger under resistance. The good person facing adversity isn't being punished. They're being refined, tested, and ultimately proven. Now I know what you're thinking. That's easy to say when you're not the one suffering. And you're right to push back. Boethius himself struggles with this idea. But here's what makes this insight so powerful. It's not about dismissing pain or pretending that injustice doesn't hurt. It's about recognizing that our deepest identity, who we really are, isn't determined by what happens to us, but by how we respond to what happens to us. Consider the difference between two people facing the same crisis. One person becomes bitter, blames the world, and allows the hardship to poison their relationships and outlook. Another person finds ways to grow, to help others, to discover reserves of strength they didn't know they possessed. The external circumstances are identical, but the internal reality, the justice of the soul, if you will, is completely different. Lady Philosophy takes this even further with a stunning insight. She suggests that the apparent prosperity of the wicked is actually evidence of divine mercy, not divine indifference. How so? Because if the universe immediately punished every wrong choice with obvious consequences, we'd all be in serious trouble. The fact that consequences are often delayed or hidden gives us space to change, to recognize our mistakes, to choose differently. What looks like injustice might actually be an expression of incredible patience and hope. But here's the most revolutionary part of her argument. True justice isn't about getting even, it's about becoming whole. The highest form of justice isn't punishment, it's restoration. When we focus obsessively on whether bad people are getting what they deserve, we're missing the point entirely. The real question isn't whether others are being punished, but whether we're becoming the kind of people we're meant to be. This doesn't mean we should be passive in the face of injustice or stop working to make the world better. Rather, it means we can engage in that work from a place of inner peace rather than bitter resentment. We can fight for justice without being consumed by the need for revenge. We can work to protect the innocent without being poisoned by hatred for the guilty. As we sit here with our coffee, processing these ideas, we might find that Lady Philosophy has given us something unexpected. Not answers that make the world's pain disappear, but a way of seeing that transforms how we carry that pain. The world may still seem unjust, but perhaps we're beginning to understand that true justice operates on a level deeper than we ever imagined. Picture this: you're sitting in a cold, damp prison cell stripped of everything you once held dear. Your wealth gone, your political position destroyed, your reputation shattered by false accusations. Your friends have abandoned you and death looms on the horizon. This was the reality for Anicius Manlius Severinus Boethius in the year 524 AD. And yet from this pit of despair, he would write one of the most profound works on finding peace and meaning that the world has ever known. Now think about this for a moment. When was the last time you felt like everything was falling apart? Maybe you lost a job you thought was secure, or a relationship you believed would last forever crumbled before your eyes. Perhaps you faced a health scare that made you question everything you thought you knew about life. We've all been there, haven't we? That moment when the ground beneath our feet seems to give way, and we're left wondering how to make sense of it all. This is exactly where Boethius found himself, and it's precisely in this darkness that philosophy herself appears to him, not as an abstract concept, but as a wise, nurturing woman who gently but firmly begins to heal his wounded soul. Imagine having coffee with the wisest person you've ever known, someone who sees right through your pain to the deeper truths you've forgotten. That's what this encounter represents. Philosophy doesn't coddle Boethius. She doesn't tell him his problems aren't real or that he should just think positive thoughts. Instead, she does something far more profound. She helps him remember who he truly is beneath all the external circumstances that have defined him. She reminds him that his identity isn't his job title, his bank account, or even his reputation. It's something much deeper and more enduring. Think about how we often define ourselves today. We say things like, I'm a teacher, or I'm a parent, or I'm successful, or I'm struggling. But what happens when those external labels are stripped away? Philosophy teaches Boethius, and through him teaches us, that our true self exists independent of these temporary conditions. It's like being an actor who's become so identified with a particular role that they've forgotten their real name. The role might end, the costume might come off, but the actor remains. This insight becomes the foundation for everything else philosophy will teach about finding genuine consolation. She explains that most of our suffering comes from attaching our sense of well-being to things that are, by their very nature, temporary and unreliable. We chase after wealth, thinking it will bring us security, but then we worry constantly about losing it. We seek fame and recognition, but then we become slaves to public opinion. We build our happiness on relationships, careers, and possessions, all of which can disappear in an instant. Now, this doesn't mean philosophy advocates for a life of detachment or indifference. She's not suggesting we shouldn't care about anything or anyone. Rather, she's pointing toward a different kind of engagement with the world, one rooted in understanding what truly matters and what doesn't. It's like the difference between holding sand with a clenched fist, watching it slip through your fingers, versus cupping your hands gently and appreciating its presence while it's there. One of the most powerful metaphors philosophy uses is that of fortune's wheel. Picture a giant wheel, constantly turning with people clinging to its rim. Sometimes you're at the top, enjoying success and happiness, and sometimes you're at the bottom, experiencing loss and disappointment. Most people spend their lives either celebrating their position at the top or despairing when they're at the bottom, never realizing that the wheel's movement is the one constant they can count on. But here's where the real wisdom comes in. Philosophy suggests that true peace comes not from trying to stop the wheel or even from trying to stay at the top, but from moving to the center, to the hub around which everything revolves but which itself remains still. This center represents a kind of inner stability that doesn't depend on external circumstances. It's what we might call today finding your center, discovering that place within yourself that remains calm regardless of the storms raging around you. This reminds me of something a friend once told me about learning to surf. He said the biggest mistake beginners make is fighting the wave, trying to force their way through the water. But experienced surfers learn to work with the wave's energy, to find their balance not by resisting the motion, but by understanding it and moving with it gracefully. That's what philosophy is teaching Boethius about life itself. The consolation she offers isn't a quick fix or a simple formula. It's more like learning a new way of seeing, a fundamental shift in perspective that changes everything. When you truly understand that your worth isn't determined by your circumstances, something remarkable happens. You can face loss without being destroyed by it. You can enjoy success without being enslaved by it. You can love deeply without the desperate fear of loss that often accompanies attachment. This ancient wisdom feels remarkably relevant in our modern world, doesn't it? We live in a time of constant change, where careers that seemed stable can vanish overnight, where relationships can end with a text message, where our sense of security can be shaken by events completely beyond our control. The specific circumstances may be different from Boethius's imprisonment, but the human experience of facing uncertainty and loss remains remarkably constant across the centuries. Philosophy's consolation teaches us that peace isn't something we achieve by controlling our external circumstances, but something we discover by understanding our relationship to those circumstances. It's not about becoming indifferent to life's ups and downs, but about finding a deeper source of stability that allows us to engage fully with life without being overwhelmed by its inevitable changes. As we continue our journey through Boethius's profound dialogue with philosophy, we'll discover that this initial consolation is just the beginning. The peace and understanding she offers will deepen into insights about the nature of happiness, the meaning of suffering, and ultimately, the very purpose of human existence itself. Boethius, The Consolation of Philosophy, is a profound exploration of how humans can find peace and wisdom amidst suffering and misfortune. Through a dialogue between the author and Lady Philosophy, it delves into timeless questions about happiness, fortune, and the ultimate good. The book reminds us that while external circumstances may be beyond our control, our inner state is not. Here are some key takeaways. 1. True happiness comes from within. Happiness isn't found in external possessions or accomplishments, but in the cultivation of virtue and wisdom. Start incredibly small by cultivating gratitude for the simple joys in life. Each day, notice and appreciate one thing that enriches your life beyond material wealth. 2. Fortune is ever-changing. Boethius reminds us that fortune is by nature fickle. Instead of resisting change, embrace it. When faced with unexpected challenges, be patient with yourself and view each situation as an opportunity for growth. 3. The importance of perspective. Often, our distress comes from our perceptions rather than the events themselves. Practice reframing negative situations by asking yourself what valuable lesson can be learned, fostering a mindset of resilience. 4. Seek wisdom over wealth. The pursuit of wisdom is a more stable and fulfilling goal than the pursuit of wealth. Dedicate a few minutes each day to reading or reflecting on something that expands your understanding of the world and enriches your soul. 5. Control what you can. Focus on controlling your reactions and emotions rather than external events. Apply this by taking a few deep breaths whenever you feel overwhelmed, centering yourself before responding to difficult situations. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below with at least one idea from this book that stuck with you, one concept you're going to carry forward. It could be something that challenged your thinking, something you want to try, or even something you disagreed with. Your insight might be exactly what another listener needs to hear today. And if this summary gave you something valuable, a new perspective, a spark of motivation, or even just a peaceful hour with your coffee, share it with someone who might need it too. Subscribe to One Book, One Coffee, and hit that bell icon so you never miss a new summary. Every week, we sit down together with one great book, one warm cup of coffee, and the simple belief that wisdom, shared well, can change lives. Until next time, keep reading, keep growing, and remember, every small step counts. See you at the next book.